If you want to drop in the chat while we're waiting, where you're from, maybe like why you're here, that'd be dope. I see some folks have their hands raised. If you want to just drop in the chat what's going on, you can do that.
The chat's disabled.
Oh, the chat might be closed. Cool.
You can drop it in the Q&A. We work out the technical kinks.
Sweet. Well, let's get started. Thank you everyone for joining us here, and thanks to our panelists for being here with us. My name is Shiva Rajbandari. I am a Green New Deal for Schools organizer with the Sunrise Movement, and currently a freshman at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill studying public policy and math. Last year, I was elected to the Boise School Board. I was the first student ever elected as a senior in high school to serve on my school board, really on a campaign of putting students' voices first and acting on the climate crisis. And so I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to be organizing in solidarity with y'all as we build the decade of the Green New Deal. And today, we are going to talk about one aspect, one framework through which we are going to build that vision of the Green New Deal, and that is the Green New Deal for public schools. It's no secret that students deserve that education is facing a lot of challenges right now. We've got, the far right is waging this war on public schools, on the things that are being taught, on the identities of our students, and yet we are also, facing unprecedented times coming out of a pandemic, and facing, schools today are more segregated than they were back in the 1960s. And so this conversation is super relevant as storms rage stronger, as fires rage hotter, as floods grow more severe with each passing year. And it's time that we talk about what we're going to do about it. The Green New Deal for public schools lays out a plan for the federal government to make historic and long overdue investments in a just, climate-safe education system. That's a public education system that truly reduces the historic inequities among students rather than widening them, and transforms our school buildings into healthy, safe places to learn, work, and play, paired with strong labor supports. And this would bring countless benefits to students and staff, from increased physical well-being to better educational outcomes, while creating millions of jobs in the process. So today we are joined by some incredible leaders in the push for the Green New Deal for Schools, some thought leaders, some organizers. And I just want to give each of our panelists a second to introduce themselves, maybe tell us, where you're from, why you're here, and what, what brought you to the climate/schools intersection, and where you see this fight going. So Akira, I'll pass it off to you. You're the author of the Green New Deal for Public Schools Act. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for being out, coming here, signing on. My name is Akira Drake Rodriguez. I'm a professor of city planning at the University of Pennsylvania and a member of the Climate and Community Project, which was the research think tank behind the Green New Deal for Schools. I'm one of many authors of this report, which was eventually introduced into legislation in July 2021. And I'm just super excited that we're doing this big push right now, more timely than ever. So I won't take up too much time with an intro. I'll popcorn. Let's see. Ashley is next on my screen. Cool.
We can pass it to Lauren. Thank you, Akira.
Oh, whoops, sorry.
Hey everybody. So my name is Lauren Bianchi. This is my 6th year teaching social studies in Chicago Public Schools. For all 6 years of my career, I've been teaching at a school called George Washington High School on the far southeast side, which is right on the border between Indiana and Chicago. And I'll just say kind of what brought me to the intersection of climate and schools. I call myself an accidental environmentalist because while I've always been concerned about the environment, it really wasn't the priority issue for me until I got hired to teach at a school in one of the most polluted neighborhoods in Chicago. So the neighborhood where I teach is an environmental justice community. It has this rich history of residents defending themselves from hazardous polluters. And in 2020, about 3 years ago, myself and some of the other teachers and students at my school, we actually got involved in a community-led campaign to stop an industrial metal shredder from being relocated like right across the street from our school. So that was a really incredible experience. I learned a ton, and it really just illustrated for me how the lack of air conditioning, the lack of high quality air filtration, the outdated and crumbling facilities that we deal with in schools is very much connected to the environmental and climate hazards in the community. So that's kind of how I wound up here, and I'll say more later.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for joining us. And I'll pass it to Ashley to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Michel Flores. I use she, her, they pronouns. I'm coming to you live from Los Angeles. I'm in Koreatown, so right in the middle of the city. I'm a community organizer at LANE, which stands for Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, and we serve as an anchor org for this group, Reclaim Our Schools LA. So right now I am working in coalition with other organizations to organize, which I'll talk about in a second, but to organize parents, students, community members, and educators of LAUSD around climate justice in LA schools. I'm really happy to share with you all that through the contract bargaining process, we were able to secure commitments by the district for climate justice items. So now the work is about like implementing the language that was won. So yeah, and I would say I have been pretty passionate about climate for most of my life. I grew up in Fresno County actually, and was always affected by droughts and just the fear of like running out of water ever since I was a really little kid. But I think like as a young adult now and like as a community organizer, like the way that I really got activated like in this kind of work is just really identifying that climate justice is education justice and is racial justice too, because it's not an accident the way that communities were redlined, and that same kind of layout is the way that we can also see patterns of illness because of pollution and areas that are more impacted by like extreme heat, urban heat islands, and all that jazz. So I think with that, I feel really honored to be on this panel and to share space and some of the experiences that we've seen here in LA.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We're really looking forward to hearing some of your experience. Kush, I'll pass it to you. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us why you're here?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kush. I use he, him pronouns. I am a representative of the Green New Deal for DC Coalition. We are a coalition here that's looking to figure out what a Green New Deal for DC looks like for DC. We already passed, or we have already introduced one piece of legislation that is Green New Deal oriented, which is the Green New Deal for housing. And we have a lot of support for that on the council, which would bring social housing, which is something that's really brand new for the United States, but really try to fight back against our housing crisis. And we're really excited to start thinking about what this Green New Deal for public schools looks like. I grew up in Montgomery Village, Maryland, which is a majority BIPOC, majority working class population. And Lauren, I like the way that you framed it. I feel like I'm an accidental environmentalist, because when your schools are very what's the word, very dirty, when the teachers aren't taken care of, when you have kids that are getting into trouble, when there's police brutality, like you are not thinking about climate change. And I feel like only until I got older, I recognized how all these things connect. And I think that's what I bring to this space, is this understanding of intersectionality and the way that we have to use a climate lens, because actually, as you said, all these things are connected, and it is on purpose. And one of my roles as a community organizer is figure out how can we bring people in, and how can we make people not only care about their housing, not only care about their schools, not only care about the buses that they ride, but also how they all connect, and how one of those things that it connects is how climate change is impacting us. So I'm really grateful to be here. Y'all are incredible people, and I look forward to talking with you.
Thanks for joining us, Kush. I'll pass it to Dieter. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dieter Lima Morales, he, him. I also come from the nation's capital here in Washington, D.C. I am a 10th grade world history teacher by trade. It's my second year teaching Columbia Heights Educational Campus in the beautiful Columbia Heights neighborhood here in D.C. I'm also a proud member of the Washington Teachers Union, where I serve on the executive board of our union, which is currently, as it might have been mentioned prior to this, we're currently in negotiations with our school district on our new contract. And I was one of the folks that was that proposed that asked for a contract team to include a proposal on including a climate curriculum task force into our upcoming contract, should it be ratified or be approved after we get to negotiations. Currently, the school district is refusing to come to the table to negotiate, so that's a different story, but happy to talk about that some other time. I'm also a local elected official here in DC. I'm an advisory neighborhood commissioner, so I serve about 2,000 or so residents here in my neighborhood. We're at the sort of lower rung of DC government, if you're familiar with DC government structure. And I'm also a proud electoral organizer with the Democratic Socialists of America here in our DC chapter. I actually serve on our steering committee here as well. So to answer the question from earlier about how I came to this sort of, basically, I guess, this webinar, how I got involved in climate and in the public in public climate and public schools. Well, I like that Kush mentioned intersectionality, because I think not only is he correct, but I think I'm able to approach it the intersectionality of my different hats that I wear, right? So I'm not only am I an educator myself during the day, but I'm also a socialist. I'm a socialist organizer outside of school, and I happen to also be an elected official. So like I'm able to sort of triangulate all these three things in order to like advance legislation and policy as best I can, both from the inside and the outside, right? Using the sort of the famous inside-outside strategy. So I came to socialism about 6 years ago when I first joined DSA. I also became a member of Sunrise here in DC, and just seeing, being in schools myself, like seeing how the climate has really impacted not just our students but our infrastructure. We had a heat wave here at the end of the summer in DC, and a lot of the reports we were getting on the union side of things, even on the government side of things, were about how buildings were had faulty ACs. There were teachers and students in classrooms that were in sweltering heat because the AC wasn't running or wasn't functioning correctly. When there's floods, things like that also impact our schools. So being able to really bring that to the forefront and bring it to the attention of our legislators and our school leaders as well is very important. Not just for the climate, right? But also, as an educator, it's very important that my students and other students across the district are feeling safe and are also being equipped, not just with the knowledge of why this is happening, but also how to get involved and how to combat it. One of the things that came up in our negotiations when we were putting this proposal together, and I can happy to talk about it more in detail later, is that when we talk about climate anxiety, that's not something that or at least not in my school, and I haven't heard of any other schools doing this in our school district, that kids are not they're not being equipped with the sort of mental or psychological tools to kind of process what's going on around them. Like they're sort of innately aware of what's going on around them in a very nihilistic sense, but they're not able to process and grieve what's going on and really be equipped with the vocabulary and tools to fight back and challenge that and stand up for not just for themselves but for the climate as well. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the rest of you about this because, as Kush and I know, we're currently working on our way to kind of push for legislation here locally to really get a Green New Deal for public schools here in the District of Columbia. So I've been looking to the example of LA, how they did it. And CTU is a stellar example for our union that we like to follow in terms of their Miltonism and how active they are in agitating for better things for their teachers. So yeah, I'm really happy to be in this company, and I look forward to hearing more about you from you all.
Yeah, thank you, Dita. We're glad to have you here. And I see folks, the chat is now open and folks are already introducing themselves. If everyone wants to, all of our participants want to drop kind of their name and why they're here in the chat, we'd love to hear about you. And I know I also see some folks have started asking some questions in the chat, and I would urge you to actually use the Q&A feature. That way we can keep those questions isolated and see them out of the other discussion going on in the chat. But yeah, happy to have so many engaged panelists here, or excuse me, engaged attendees here and this incredible panel. So thanks again all for joining us. And let's get started. I'll start with you, Akira. You are the lead author of the Green New Deal for Public Schools report. You have, countless years of experience dealing on, the intersection of climate and schools. And I was wondering, why is the Green New Deal for public schools necessary? And maybe you could break down why this level of federal investment is important and what it would mean for our U.S. public education system.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the motivation behind the report was essentially from my own observations of what was happening here on the ground in Philly. In Philadelphia, parents, teachers, students, other organizers have been working for decades to make our schools healthy and sustainable. The schools that are currently in Philadelphia, there are about 215 school facilities. They have, asbestos, mold, lead, vermin. Half of them don't have air conditioning. They're unable to open during the beginning of the school year. They have to close at the end of the school year. And it's really quite disruptive. This was only exacerbated during the pandemic when we had shelter-in-place policies, and a lot of our schools did not have sufficient ventilation to allow students to come back in. There have been fatalities ranging from asthma attacks to explosions of boilers that were constructed in the 1940s. So this is an issue that impacts families, students, staff, everyone who's working in or near public schools in the city. As Lauren and others have mentioned, this is not uncommon across the country. But unfortunately, there's really no federal guidance around school facilities and safety in that way. And so the idea is to get the federal government, who has the spending power and ability and authority to really make schools healthy and safe places to be, where both students and staff and teachers want to be. So we really see research shows the connections between comfortable classrooms and academic achievement and, standardized test performance. I'm not indicating that standardized tests are the end all be all, but certainly if you need that sort of objective measure, that's one way of thinking about it. It also just limits turnover in terms of, retaining quality staff and teachers and administrators in the buildings. And generally, it also brings parents and other members of the community into schools. Our schools can serve as things outside of traditional educational spaces. They can be community spaces, they can be resilience hubs, they can be used in times of these frequent climate emergencies that we're seeing more with greater frequency over time. So that was really the idea. So again, the federal government is not a contributor really at all to facility condition. They don't track it. There's no census. There's no data collected. There's no legislation or departments that are dedicated to supporting that transition. And so what we see is the kind of continuance of a lot of inequities that are baked into school financing, largely property taxes, which we know has a deep connection to race and class, redlining. We're all very familiar with that story. All of that And with these sort of redline communities, you are more likely to have a lot of kind of toxic spaces and air quality outside of the building, as Lauren kind of mentioned. As others have mentioned, this is where your landfills will go. This is where your iron factories will go. And those are also going to be causing really sort of hazardous outcomes for everyone who uses that building. There are also 100,000 K-12 schools across the country. And so this is a way to make climate and resilience baked into every place that's really accessible and serves as sort of a model for how we can really think about building out our futures to be sustainable and resilient. In addition to putting in a lot of investment into facilities, it's also important to, as someone from the EPA said, to think about the brains and the body of the school. And so this would also quadruple funding to Title I, give funding to teachers to develop curriculums around climate justice and really sort of make it a priority, to encourage a lot of participation from parents and students and other stakeholders to be involved in what a Green New Deal for schools could look like at, in your local neighborhood and catchment. So we've really kind of created this bill really so that the federal government can kind of be a leader. These plans can work at the local and state level, but funding is really, really tight. And as we know, there is this really aggressive attack on public education at the time. And so the federal government can sort of challenge those attacks by really sort of putting their money where it can be well spent, and can, again, just make these sort of like ripple effects into local community to deal with the climate crisis.
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective. And I want to pass it to Lauren from the Chicago Teachers Union, because as Akira mentioned, acting on the climate crisis, it has to be baked into everything that we do in education. And the Chicago Teachers Union recently led the path to victory for Mayor Brandon Johnson after decades of long-term member-led organizing. Lauren, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how a teachers union like CTU has baked in climate justice to everything y'all are doing, and kind of maybe the role that labor has to play in this fight for a Green New Deal for public schools. What are your goals of the Climate Justice Committee? How did you get it started, and what do you see as next for the face of teachers union organizing for climate justice?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll just say that it was super exciting at the end of last week that Mayor Brandon Johnson actually came forward to publish his basically environmental justice plan in partnership with multiple environmental justice organizations, including one that I work closely with called the Southeast Environmental Task Force, which folks should check out. They're an incredible resource. But yeah, I mean, so I am currently chair of the Chicago Teachers Union Climate Justice Committee. I was not technically a founding member, but I did join when the committee was fairly new. And so I can say just a little bit about kind of what that was like, how I came to join the committee, and some of the work that we've tried to do. Because yeah, I mean, climate justice is still something that, like, as other speakers have mentioned, like, if you ask the average teacher or student or CPS parent, what their top 3 priorities are, it's going to be putting food on the table, paying rent, accessing healthcare, transportation, and like green schools, or whatever that means, is not going to be a top priority yet. So we've been a space where, like, people can figure out, like, how do we make connections between all of these issues, which really are all green schools issues, but don't necessarily seem that way unless you have been around people that are talking that way, right? So yeah, I got involved in the Climate Justice Committee during the pandemic. Honestly, we were stuck inside. That is when I had gotten involved in local environmental justice organizing in my school community. We had heard about the threats of a metal shredder known as General Iron was going to be relocated from another neighborhood near my school. And all of us were stuck in our houses, and we were going to, like, Zoom meetings and virtual community meetings to figure out how we could devote some of the time that we had during the lockdowns to, bettering the community. So that's when I decided, like, okay, I need to reach out to somebody in the union, others in other schools, to figure out, like, as teachers, what is our role in this? How can we work with folks in the community leaders, parents, and students to address some of these issues. So thankfully, there were people in a committee that I could reach out to and say, hey, this is going on at my school. Is this something that, you all can back me up on, that we can kind of figure out how we want to relate to it? And that's how I kind of got involved. So the teachers who started the committee, from my understanding, were honestly just really inspired by youth activism, youth climate activism globally, really inspired by, actions by Greta Thunberg, the youth climate strikes, and we're just teachers that really wanted to figure out how we could tap into that as educators and connect our students to this like global movement. When I got involved, I was kind of the person that was like, that's great, but nobody really cares. Like, the issues that people do care about right now are the more environmental justice issues and the facilities issues, like lead, asbestos, and mold, lack of filtered drinking water in our schools, just the crumbling conditions of our schools. So for me, I was always kind of trying to figure out, like, how do we take these issues that are much more immediate to people, are much more impactful and easy to kind of grapple with, workplace issues, that is kind of a gateway. It was a gateway for me, right? Like, I was somebody who, now I am like now I am able to make the connections. Now I am able to like communicate these connections to others. But what allowed me to do that was the fact that, these environmental hazards were directly impacting my workplace. So about 2 years ago, there had been like ongoing ceiling and roof construction at my school for many years, even before I got hired 6 years ago. There had been like various rounds of repair, kind of constant repairs being done to the roof. And then about 2 years ago, on the last day of student attendance, like the last day that students have to attend school, part of the second floor ceiling collapsed in my, like, near my classroom. Actually, a security guard was actually injured by falling debris. Thank goodness no students were injured or harmed. Like, it was not during a passing period, so nobody was really in the hall other than like a security guard. But for us, that was kind of like a wake-up call of like, we knew that our facilities were really bad, but that was something that kind of allowed us to galvanize a lot of people. We had like a big press conference about the ceiling collapse, and we really had to pressure like CPS to fix it immediately. Like, we shouldn't have to wait. Like, this should be fixed so that when students return to school in the fall, that it's fixed. So yeah, I through kind of like that work, got involved with organizing my coworkers and parents in the community to basically push not just for another Band-Aid, not just for like another patchwork solution to the ceiling, but like, my school needs like a new green school building, and we're also not even the only school that needs a new green building in the neighborhood. And we also don't just want a new building that has some solar panels slapped on it that CPS can say, oh, look, we built you a green new school. But, as Akira and others have spoken to, like, our school should be a resilience hub. We should have gardening. We should have curriculum and programs that actually are going to train our students for green jobs, union jobs, living wage jobs. We need career and technical education, CTE. So those are kind of all the things that our committee has raised. It definitely has taken us several years to kind of elevate these issues. Some of the other things, so we've done things like, we held so teachers at a school actually there was a very severe issue of lead paint chipping from the ceiling. There had been like some moisture in the air that caused the paint to chip in a very old historic building. And they had successfully basically mobilized to force CPS to quickly step in and repair the ceiling, and remove the lead paint. So this had kind of inspired a lot of people. They kind of wanted to find out, well, how do I know if I have lead paint in my school? So we did like a self-lead test kit distribution event where we basically had like teacher leaders from that school come speak about how they did lead testing and what happened at their school. We like allowed other people could pick up a lead test kit just to kind of like bring the issue into people's workplaces. Is this something, I mean, the work of elevating these issues is definitely ongoing. Next year in 2024, we will be headed into contract negotiations. So we definitely want to make sure that we're bringing some of these green schools demands into our contract negotiations. We also, for the last 3 years, have done like some small but positive events around Earth Day and Earth Week. So like we encourage all CTU members last year during the week of Earth Day, Earth Week, to like teach a lesson that connects in some way to climate justice or environmental justice. We made like a Google Doc teaching toolkit that we distributed so that anybody could kind of like grab elementary, middle school, or high school resources to do that. So just kind of trying to connect whether people want to like test or report on cruddy facilities in their school, whether they are really passionate about teaching updated climate justice lessons, finding like every way that we can provide for CTU members to connect.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. That, I mean, wow, you guys have done a lot. And one of the things that I was really resonating with was how you're talking about these things, not just as priorities for teachers, but how this is stuff that students were coming to you and saying, we want this for our schools. And this is stuff that parents were concerned about. When they found out there was lead paint in one school, they're like, well, we want to find out if there's lead paint in all the schools. And Ashley, it makes me think of some of the work you've done with the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, LANE, where you brought teachers, students, community organizers together to advance common goals in a similar way as Lauren. And I was wondering maybe if you could talk about kind of some of the challenges that have come up around that and how you've overcome those and what does it look like really to get students, parents, community organizers, and teachers all aligned as we work to build the Green New Deal economy.
I think this is a really good segue because I think that what Lauren really highlighted was that, and like as you were saying too, like every stakeholder at a school and in the community benefits from having like a fully funded public school and one that isn't falling apart, one that teaches students about climate, like because just naturally, like these are the students that are going to be the next generations, and so we should be empowering students to think up of solutions instead of it just having to respond to them or even feeling powerless, like they can't do anything. I think Dieter's points earlier about like, I can't remember if it was Dieter or Kush, but like climate, like nihilism, like that's so real. But anyways, I think, so as far as like Lane's work, our mission has really been to fight for working families and a sustainable environment for our 30 years that we've been around. And the way that this takes shape in our education campaign, which is the campaign that I organize on, is through our coalition work. And so we're 4 anchor organizations that come together, and we're pretty cool because like we all have kind of like our own like niches around like how we envision like justice in public schools. And so Lane has really been taking lead on like the climate issues on that, and especially like with organizing parents and community organizations. But we have our labor partner, UTLA, which has been super strong in really building up a fighting union of, their educators. And then we have really, 2 awesome community-based organizations that like Students Deserve, their other anchor organization, and they're really awesome because they are student-led and mostly Black and Brown student-led, which has been really, really awesome. And so it's kind of like, so Lane is really focused on like parent and community organizing, UTLA with like educator organizing, obviously they're serving their members. Students Deserve with organizing students, and their whole thing is like reimagining student safety, mostly around like abolition and like investment in Black students, but kind of goes with the two, of course. And last but not least, ACE, which is they're like a statewide org in California, but here in Los Angeles, they do a lot of organizing around housing justice and tenants' rights, and also just like supporting like traditional public schools from privatization. So we all kind of come together, and we know that we have the common goal of, you know, meaningful investment in our public schools, racial justice in our public schools, and really empowering disenfranchised voices like parents and rank and file educators, because the bureaucracy of the Board of Education is even really hard for me to understand sometimes, and I can definitely see how it can be very intimidating for everyday people who just want the best for their kids, but the district makes it so hard to make that a reality. And so the organizing this coalition and having like our strategy is also to have a presence in each of the 7 school board districts in LAUSD, which isn't an easy feat because LAUSD is the 2nd largest school district in the whole country. It's a huge swath of land. I'm sure you all are familiar with how California is famously a sprawling metropolis instead of these concentrated like urban areas. So it's a really big area. But yeah, and I think also just to like bring it back to like our common demands. So you know, I mentioned UTLA, really awesome union that has really been organizing for the past 10 years to create a fighting union, really a product of especially like BIPOC rank and file organizers that have really made the union into what it is now. But realizing that there's a lot of power in a union contract, and bringing community into it is how we really build like labor and community power. It's how we build the labor movement, and it's also how we improve the conditions of people that are most affected by you know, structural oppression in our communities. And so the way that has looked recently, like with our coalition, is really opening up like, you know, we have like our meetings and stuff, like we have events and actions and whatnot, but especially in this last iteration of contract bargaining, we held a series of listening sessions and like town halls where we really asked people from all over LAUSD, what is it that you want to see in your schools? And we didn't put like limits to it. Like we just wanted people to dream. And believe it or not, like even though they didn't directly say like climate justice was a top priority, like green spaces, things like teaching gardens, clean drinking water, like these kind of like facilities things, or just like the physical spaces of schools and curriculum were something that came up a lot amongst our people. And I thought that was very encouraging. And I think also it's due to the fact that like most schools in Southern California and like almost all of them in LA are exposed to the elements, like they're outdoor schools. And so the areas where students play or where they have break and lunch are usually completely asphalted. Many schools don't have like fields, or like just imagine like the whole yard is just blacktop, and you can just already imagine like how hot it gets during the summer. And we have pretty intense summers. So that is something that's like super top of mind for families. And so that was coming up a lot. And yeah, so with all of that, that's how we really informed like our common good bargaining platform, our healthy green public schools. And so from there, Lane did the work of building relationships with other community organizations in Los Angeles that were also fighting for climate justice, and like applying that lens into like, how can we expand your work into schools? Because there's a school in every neighborhood. And so that could be a huge source of potential for like things that Akira mentioned as like resilience hubs, because these climate emergencies are getting more and more common. And yeah, so with all of that, I think yeah, I think I'll leave off on that because yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the work that you've been doing, bringing folks together around that. We've heard from the West Coast, the best coast. We've heard from the Midwest, and Dieter, I want to turn to you on over here on the East Coast, in the DC area. You know, Ashley mentioned some of the common struggles, the common bargaining needs of folks in LA, from racial justice and abolition to preventing privatization to more green spaces in a very urban, sprawled out metro area. What are some of the driving demands for climate justice for schools in the DC area? And how do you think they might differ from Los Angeles? How are you, and what kind of work are you doing with building that coalition and making these demands a reality in DC?
Sure. So I think I'll start with the second question in terms of coalition building. So I think it's a very important component of anything that we do in the organizing space, right? You need to bring people with you. You can't just do things on your own. But so it's very important you try to build a coalition. And as excuse me, as Chris could probably talk to as well when we get to him, you know, part of building that coalition is, as a teacher, especially as a labor organizer in our teachers union, is also bringing the community around you, right? And that's something that really resonated with me when Ashley said this in her comments, is that, you know, arguing for common cause, you know, or making sure that the community knows that, you know, you're not just, you might be fighting for a fair contract, a better contract for you as a teacher and your coworkers, but you're also fighting for the students themselves and the parents and the communities that you're serving in these schools. And so that's part of why I proposed this. That's part of why, you know, I brought this forward to our union to say, hey, like, this is a very, you know, we have a very momentous opportunity here to do something about this issue as we're getting ready to negotiate a new contract, you know, and something that is going to impact our schools going forward. If we truly want to be forward thinking and look into the future and what problems might arise in 4 or 5 years when this contract goes to expire, we have to be proactive. And that part of being proactive is addressing the climate crisis, or the climate emergency rather, and how we can we can respond to that as a school district, as a union. And so to, you know, part of that coalition is not just bringing the union together and having the union support this, but also bringing, you know, parent groups. There's, you know, very active, you know, parent advocacy group here in DC that we're looking to bring along with our coalition, bringing youth-centered organizations as well, organizations that are led by youth themselves, who are in these schools or were in these schools, who are going to be once impacted in a few years, right? You know, I'm only 31, but the students that I have now, or that have come out of our DCPS schools recently, they're the ones who are going to be really living with these changes and impacts more so than I will. And so bringing them on board as well, and all the other organizations in DC that also advocate for teachers as well, and outside of our union. So really trying to put together a really diverse and, you know, a very whole coalition around this. It's also worth noting that in DC, in comparison to Chicago or LA, our educational system is run a little differently, if I could say that. We have mayoral control. So the school itself, the school districts are run by our mayor, who I don't think very highly of, but we can get into that as well later on. But so she has a lot of control over the power of the schools as it comes to the government. And so our state board of education, for instance, doesn't have that much authority on these matters, as opposed to what the city council does or what the actual mayor's office does. You know, in LA, this works out for them because, you know, the state board has actual sort of power and authority over the schools, like a normal state board would, but ours is kind of defanged here based on the structure that we have. So we kind of have to, you know, you have to kind of have a lay of the land and know what you're working with and build a coalition to kind of counter that. And so back to your sort of first question in terms of what the demands are that we've compiled in this proposal. I think a lot of these things have been touched on by some of the other panelists here, especially from Chicago and LA. Not just, and it goes beyond, you know, I'm looking at my proposal right here that we put together, and it's, you know, it goes beyond just putting a curriculum that's climate focused, right? And you know, we talk about racial justice and all the sort of intersectionalities around climate justice, but, you know, actually making sure that it's, you know, if it's being taken up by the school district, that's something that needs to be taught in schools, and so that needs to be permeated throughout our classes and our curriculum in any class that we teach, right? Making sure that we focus on outdoor spaces, making sure outdoor learning is an option and it's a possibility for our students. Something that we saw was very beneficial during the pandemic when we were under lockdown. creating instructional partnerships, youth internships. We just saw recently how the federal government finally announced the Climate Corps, the Civilian Climate Corps, and so scaling that down a little bit at the local level and creating partnerships for our students to be able to take on these sorts of roles that are going to be necessary into the future. Providing them the sort of expertise and skills to go and get one of these green jobs into the future. Focusing on nutrition and health, creating a task force around both of these things to kind of also, I think this also goes hand in hand with being climate resilient and focusing on how we can make our school lunches or school meals more healthy, more nutritious, more green. Having someone at each school be a dedicated quote unquote climate champion that's given like a stipend that's meant to focus on how to make that school site more green and how to really champion and advocate these causes. But also it goes beyond just asking for these things. It also, in terms of advocacy, we're suggesting saying, hey, like maybe we should look into more, because like I said, there are certain limitations that we have as a union and given our current structure. So there are things that we can ask for in our contract, but there are things that we can only suggest that the district does given our sort of limited purview. But we can still ask for them, right? And it's important that we do so. And things like making sure that we put together recommendations about installing more solar panels across district-owned facilities, using unionized contractors, advocating for the diversification of our district's bus fleet, making them more electrified. Because there's we talk a lot about intersectionality here. Transportation is another one, right? Not just making the schools themselves more green and more climate resilient, also making the buses that take the kids to school, either the school buses from the schools themselves, but the buses from the citywide sort of metro system, making them electrified, and working with their union, right? We talk about, again, intersectionality, not just working as us as a teachers union, but also working with the transit unions, working with other unions across the city that would be doing this work. Partnering with the metro system again here in DC to make sure that not just students have free transit, but also staff, right? If we want to cut back on teachers using cars to go to work, making the metro accessible to them as well. I'm fortunate that I can walk to school. I live in the same community where I go to school, so I can just walk to school every morning. But not all of my coworkers, not all my comrades in my union have that same sort of luxury. So making sure that they're also able to take advantage of a free public metro system. Water filtration stations, removal of detectable levels of lead. That's something else that came up earlier in this panel. Exploring the feasibility of benefits of stormwater collection on district land. Another one, going back to transportation, advocating for the increased installment of universal electric vehicle chargers on school campuses. Making if folks, because we also recognize that we have a lot of teachers that come from out of state or out of the DC area, from Virginia or Maryland, to come into our schools to teach. If they have to drive in, then let them make it easier for them to get an electric vehicle and then charge it on our school campuses. Yeah. And then just also work with other partnerships or seek other partnerships with other external organizations to sort of defray the costs associated with school greening initiatives. So there's a variety of things that we can take, or a variety of initiatives and things that we can do to kind of advocate for greener schools. And like I said, it takes shape in a variety of forms. It doesn't have to be just about the schools themselves and like how do we make the school buildings more resilient, but how do we, like I said, like transportation, how do we make the transportation itself to the schools more green, more climate resilient? How do we, going back to what I kind of said in my opening remarks, within the schools themselves, how do we teach our students about what's going on around them? How do we give them the vocabulary and the skills to not just prepare themselves for what's coming, but also to understand what's coming and to process it? And like I said, there's a lot of climate nihilism in my school, and I'm sure it happens across all the schools in the district. But like equipping or like putting more resources into our mental health professionals and school psychologists and social workers, that not just so they can serve that role, but also giving them the sort of knowledge and training to be able to handle deal with students who are being or depressed or have anxiety because of what's going on in the climate, when they see that their schools are being shut down because of heat waves, or there's flooding, or XYZ reason that we could go on and on about. So really, this is a very, very holistic issue that needs to be addressed. And I'm to kind of wrap it up here, I'm very glad that our teachers union is kind of leading the charge here. Like it goes to show, kind of go back full circle, that it shows that as we're going through these contract negotiations, that we're not looking at it we're not looking at for ourselves. And no teacher ever is, in any contract, whether it be in LA and in Chicago and DC. Every teacher does it for them, looks out for the community they deserve. And this manifests itself within the context of climate. We want to make sure that our schools are resilient, will be around for generations to come, for other generations of students here in DC to attend, and students don't have to worry about like what's coming and not know how to deal with it. So we're looking out for the community here as well in our contract, and I'm very proud that the WTU is able to is pushing for this in our negotiations, and we hope that the school district will come to the table and recognize that and that this is in all of our benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Dieter. And I want to bring Kushan also on this question. Kush, how have you brought folks in from the DC area, and how do you see that, like how did you build these demands to put together a strong bargaining platform for Green New Deal for schools in DC?
Thanks, Shiv. I really appreciate the question. Well, I think a lot of our work is really grounded in the housing work that we have done here. As I said, that we introduced the Green New Deal for Housing, which is a bill that would bring net zero buildings that are socially owned, they're publicly owned. And like that's a very complex issue for a lot of folks to grapple with when they're dealing with where they're gonna get money for groceries, what their kids are dealing with. And despite all of that, we had one of the highest turnouts for public hearings in 2022. And that's because when we create policy that is impactful, ones that center the folks that are most vulnerable, people are going to come out for it. People are going to care. So when we approach what the Green New Deal for public schools looks like, we want to make sure that we are approaching it we are trying to figure out what teachers and students really need. We want to make sure that we're just as intentional as careful. Do students want fellowship programs? Do they want a community garden? Do teachers want smaller class sizes? Do they want better training? Do they want, and I think I know the answer to this, do they want more money? I think those are the questions that we really want to address. And when I think about my experience as a student, I think about most importantly think about like public safety. In my high school, there would always be 3 police cars outside waiting for these Black and brown kids to do something. Every time the bell would ring, there would be 3 cops that would be going around the hallway just checking in on people. And I remember one of my friends, Roberto, was arrested for carjacking. And I haven't talked with him since, but sometimes I think about how he was put into that. It was not chosen for him. And if he had a school, if he had the support where teachers cared for him, had the capacity to care for him, if the school administration was figuring out what he would do after high school, what he would do after middle school, if he could go home or go to the after school program, if he could go home and see that his parents don't have to worry about rent, to see that his parents don't have to have a second job. I think about my friend, and I think about the kids in DC right now. I think about how right now in DC, politicians are trying to villainize children, not just here, but across the country, saying that they're the reason of our public safety crisis, say that they're the ones that are actively ripping neighborhoods apart when they are the ones that create the neighborhoods and communities that we live in. And right now in DC, we have politicians introducing a bill that would expand pretrial detention and limit those civil rights or civil justice rights that we have. So when I think about the Green New Deal for public schools, and I think I don't want to speak for the panel, but I feel like we're all on the same page. Like, we don't have the time or the space to do minor things that are not going to break the system that we're working in. We need drastic change to our public safety. We need drastic change to our housing, but we also need drastic change to how our schools work. Because if we're not giving kids the opportunity to grow, to thrive, to make mistakes, then what are we expecting of our community, right? So to answer this question that you asked, when we think about what the Green New Deal for public schools is, like, we want it to be bold, we want it to be something that is systems changing, and we want it to be something that change brings in students and brings in teachers and allows them to have the opportunities that they didn't have before, but because they deserve it. And I think that will bring in folks, and they will bring in because that's something that they care about. So yeah.
Thank you, Kush. And yeah, as we wrap up in the next 3 minutes, I would love to hear just quick 2 sentences from each of you. What's next? What is next for the Green New Deal for public schools on the local level and on the national scale? And how can folks get involved? Folks who are attending here, like, what do we need to do to make the Green New Deal for schools a reality in DC, in LA, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, and all across this country? Akira, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have already kind of spoke to building alliances with other unions and trades, reaching out to local elected officials. But the Green New Deal is an inherently local push. It really does. It can start at the federal level, that would be ideal, but it can also start at the local and state level because everyone has different needs. Every city, every community is very different, and their ability to be resilient, their ability to leverage different incentive programs and state funding are all very different. And it's really hard to make this a reality without having some sort of proof of concept. So organizing, leveraging that mobilization, and really just trying to make even the smallest kind of example of how this is possible, really kind of lifting that up to this awesome network that so many have worked hard to create across the nation.
Thank you. Yeah, and Lauren, I'll pass to you. What's next on your end? 2 sentences.
Yeah, 2 sentences. I don't know, but I do think, for those of us who are union members, we've got to talk to the other members, right? And it's easy to start by talking with the people who teach like environmental classes or science classes or things like that. But we do have to do the hard work of talking to our coworkers and our union members that aren't already convinced. And, that's a reminder for myself. It's hard work, but there's no way around the fact that we just need a ton more humans to have the opportunity to ask questions, talk through what a green school is, what the Green New Deal is. And, I love what Ashley said too. Like in CTU, we are asking people like, we have a mayor who's a former middle school teacher, so this is not the time to like accept the bare minimum. Like we want to dream big and imagine like what would our ideal schools look like.
Love it. Ashley, what's next in LA?
Okay, so I would say the parting words that I want to have is that decision makers really pay attention when they are approached by diverse stakeholders. So, when this is something we do here in LA, when we have delegation meetings or visits with our school board members, I know it's different. It looks different in each of your guys' cities, but whoever's making the decisions about what's happening at schools, go in with different groups of people. Have at least one student, at least one teacher, at least one community member, and at least one parent, and try to build for more. But as long as you have like different types of people in the same room, decision makers are going to take notice of that. And it also means that you have strength. They can't pin it as, an educator's issue or strictly a parent's issue or strictly a student's issue, but one that you all are in together. So that's my one sentence. And then the second one is really simple. It's be out in the field, like canvass your neighborhoods, try a lot of different things, but just talk to people, like do like the one-on-one stuff. Be out there when students are getting dropped off or picked up. Have a plan. Don't just like be random, but like have a plan and just talk to people. Like it really is like that on the ground work. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I canvass like 3 times a week. So yeah.
Kush, Dieter, what's next in DC? How are we going to win a Green New Deal for schools in DC?
Well, we're already busy and we're going to get busier. We just reintroduced the Green New Deal for housing with Councilor Louis George, and we are actively looking for folks to introduce the Green New Deal for public schools. I think one name is popping up, so we'll see if they follow through on their promises. But we're ready. Dieter, how about you?
Yeah, and just to build on what Kush said, and I think also building on what Ashley said, or Ashley and Lauren said earlier in terms of the union's role here, as a union organizer, yeah, our next step is to take the contract to the streets, essentially, bring it to the people, tell the parents, tell the communities that hey, the school district doesn't want to negotiate with us, or actually, in fact, our contract is expiring at the end of the month, and they still haven't come to the table with us. We sent them everything they needed, and they still haven't acknowledged that or want to meet with us. So if they don't choose to do so, we're gonna have to take more scaled up action against that to bring it to remind folks what we're fighting for, right? Like I said earlier, like this is not just about higher pay for teachers. It was also about safer and better schools for our students and for our children. And just in terms of how to get involved, as an elected official, I can also say, yeah, reach out to your local elected officials. I know that's kind of cliche, but I think our impact is a lot stronger at the local level, and I think it'll eventually trickle up to the federal level. And also, just as a shameless plug here, also, if you're looking to get more involved, like find your local DSA chapter or your Sunrise Hub, and get more involved that way. There's always something to do, and it's better to do something than sit around and do nothing. So, those will be my parting words of wisdom here.
Thank you, and yeah, if as Dieter mentioned, as we take the contract to the streets and begin to escalate in hopes of winning a Green New Deal for schools nationally, I want to shout out that this Thursday, Congressman Jamal Bowman and Senator Markey are reintroducing the Green New Deal for Public Schools Act, which is this whole vision brought together as a federal bill. We have folks joining us on the ground in DC. We have folks tuning into our live stream of the press conference at 3 p.m. Eastern. What would that be? Noon Pacific. And I'd encourage all y'all to join us this Thursday. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to everyone who showed out. This has been a co-hosted webinar with the Labor Network for Sustainability, Climate and Community Project, the Sunrise Movement, and Educators Climate Action Network. I'm Shiva Rajbandari, and really appreciate having you here. Thanks so much, y'all. Until next time.
Thank you.